500 million people will have sarcopenia by 2050. That is 500 million people who will quietly lose their muscle, not from disease, not from accident, but simply from the act of getting older. In the cruel part, most of them will not know it is happening until they fall. What if I told you that an ancient Chinese practice, combined with the right kind of strength training, is now showing up in peer-reviewed clinical trials as one of the most effective ways to reverse this process? And what if I told you that these two approaches, separated by thousands of years and half the world, are actually describing the same thing in different languages? That is exactly what today's episode is about, and we are going to hear it through the story of someone who lived it. Welcome to the Wellness Bridge. I am Gary Chen, physiotherapist and founder of Juicy Integrative Physiotherapy and Wellness on the Gold Coast. Every episode, we build a bridge between the cutting edge of Western clinical science and the deep wisdom of Eastern healing traditions. Because the more I work in this field, the more convinced I am that they are not competing, they are converging. Today we are talking about something I see in my clinic almost every week. It starts quietly, a little more stiffness in the morning, taking longer to get up off the couch, maybe a stumble on the stairs that you brush off as a clumsy moment, and then sometimes a fall that changes everything. Our guest today is David, a 62-year-old Gold Coast-based retired engineer who came to see me after 2 falls in 6 months. His story is one I want every person over 50 to hear. David, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Gary. I have been looking forward to this one.
David, take me back to before we met. What was life looking like?
Look, I thought I was doing fine. I was retired, keeping busy, going for walks most days. I had a garden I loved working in. I felt reasonably fit, I suppose. But then I tripped over my own garden hose, just stepped over it wrong, and my legs just did not respond the way I expected. I went down hard, bruised my hip.
And that was the first fall?
First one. 6 weeks later, I slipped getting out of the shower. Nothing serious, no broken bones, but I grabbed the rail and I remember thinking, that was too close. Something is wrong.
And when you came to see me, what did the assessment show?
You did that grip strength test and some kind of walking test, and you told me my muscle mass and strength were below the threshold for my age. You used a word I had never heard before.
Sarcopenia.
I had never heard of it. I thought, I exercise. I walk every day. How can I have a muscle problem?
This is one of the most important things I want our listeners to understand today. Sarcopenia is not about how much you move. It is about a specific kind of decline that happens inside the muscle at the cellular level that walking alone cannot prevent. A major systematic review published in 2022 in the Journal of Cachexia, Sarcopenia and Muscle, pulling data from 151 studies and over 692,000 participants, found that sarcopenia affects somewhere between 10 and 27% of older adults globally, depending on how it is classified. And researchers project 500 million cases by 2050. That is not a rare condition. That is an epidemic hiding in plain sight. So what actually happens inside the muscle as we age? Because this is where it gets fascinating, and where the story of why Qigong works begins. Your muscles contain 2 main types of fibers. Type 1 slow twitch fibers. These are the endurance engines. They are packed with mitochondria. They are fatigue resistant and they are relatively protected against aging. Then you have type 2 fast twitch fibers. These are your power and speed fibers, the ones you use when you push yourself up from a chair, when you catch yourself from a stumble, when you sprint for the bus. These fibers begin declining in number and size from as early as our 40s. And the research is clear that the loss of these fast twitch type 2 fibers is the primary driver of sarcopenia. Not just muscle loss in general, but specifically the kind that causes falls and loss of independence. Research published in the Journal of Cachexia, Sarcopenia and Muscle has found that aging is associated with denervation. The nerves controlling those fast twitch fibers simply disconnect, and the muscle fibers that are left behind shrink or disappear. But it gets more complex. There is a phenomenon called anabolic resistance. As we age, our muscles become desensitized to the signals that normally trigger growth. Exercise and protein, which will build muscle in a 30-year-old, produce a blunted response in a 65-year-old. The IGF-1 pathway, insulin-like growth factor, the body's main muscle building signal, becomes less efficient, and chronic low-grade inflammation driven by elevated interleukin-6 actively accelerates muscle breakdown.
So my body was working against itself?
In a sense, yes. The biological environment inside aging muscle makes it harder to build and easier to break down. Walking, which is low intensity and predominantly slow twitch, does not challenge the fast twitch fibers enough to prevent their decline, which is exactly why a 2025 meta-analysis published in Nutrients, covering 22 randomized controlled trials involving 959 sarcopenic participants, concluded that resistance training, specifically progressive loading targeting those fast twitch fibers, is the first-line evidence-based treatment for sarcopenia. Not the only treatment, but the essential foundation. Now here is where I want to take you somewhere that genuinely changed how I understand my own practice. In traditional Chinese medicine, there is a concept called Jing in Chinese. It is often translated as vital essence or life force. It is understood as the body's fundamental biological capital, the reservoir of energy that determines your vitality, your resilience, and ultimately how you age. Traditional Chinese medicine teaches that Jing is stored in the kidneys and governs the bones, marrow, and muscles. When Jing depletes through stress, poor sleep, overwork, or simply aging, the muscles weaken, the joints stiffen, and the body loses its capacity for explosive movement and recovery. Qigong was developed in part as a practice to cultivate and preserve Jing, to move it through the meridians, to nourish the tissues, and to maintain the body's anabolic capacity into old age. Now, what does Western science say about what Qigong actually does to the body? A 2025 systematic review and meta-analysis published in Phytomedicine, pulling 17 randomized controlled trials with 1,029 elderly patients, found that fitness Qigong, including forms like Baduanjin and Jing, significantly improved grip strength, peak muscle torque, gait speed, and timed up-and-go performance. These are the exact functional markers of sarcopenia. And the mechanism, research suggests that mind-body practices like Qigong reduce chronic inflammatory cytokines, including that interleukin-6 I mentioned, and may support mitochondrial health in aging muscle. Remember, slow twitch fibers resist sarcopenia precisely because of their high mitochondrial density. Practices that support mitochondrial function protect the foundation of muscle health. When ancient Chinese practitioners talked about cultivating Jing through Qigong, They were describing in their own language the upregulation of the body's energy-producing infrastructure, the mitochondria, the anabolic signaling environment, the reduction of inflammatory noise that accelerates muscle breakdown. Two traditions, two frameworks, converging on the same biological truth that intentional, mindful movement is one of the most well-evidenced strategies we have for preserving muscle health as we age.
I had no idea that is what was happening when I was doing the Qigong with you. I just thought it felt right. It felt like something was waking up.
That feeling is not imagined, David. That is your physiology responding. So let me tell you exactly what we did with David, because I want this to be practical and actionable for everyone listening. We started with a structured 12-week program, combining two approaches: 3 days per week of progressive resistance training, compound movements targeting the large lower body muscle groups, squats, step-ups, leg press, hip hinges. We started light and added load every 2 weeks. These movements directly recruit the fast-twitch type 2 fibers that are most at risk. Then, on the alternate days, 20 to 30 minutes of Baduanjin Qigong, the 8-section brocade. Each movement is slow, deliberate, breath-coordinated. The transitions require balance and neuromuscular control. The breath patterns calm the nervous system and reduce cortisol, which, chronically elevated, is another sarcopenia accelerant.
The resistance training was hard at first. My pride took a beating, I will be honest. Starting with bodyweight squats at 62, I felt like I should be able to do more.
And that humility is actually key. We have to meet the muscle where it is, not where we think it should be. Anabolic resistance means the muscle needs time to resensitize to load. You build the foundation first.
By week 6, something shifted. I noticed I was getting out of the car differently, not thinking about it, just doing it, like the body remembered something it had forgotten.
What about the Qigong side?
That was the surprise for me. I went in thinking it was just stretching, to be honest. But the Qigong, it changed something about how I inhabit my body. I became more aware of where I was in space, more deliberate, and my sleep got noticeably better, which I know you said would help.
Sleep is when growth hormone is released, when anabolic signaling does its repair work. Better sleep is not a side effect of the program. It is part of the mechanism.
By week 12, my grip strength had improved significantly. I went back for the same assessment and I had crossed back above the threshold. No more sarcopenia classification.
That is what the evidence calls reversing the sarcopenia stage. And research published in PLOS ONE in 2023 has confirmed that consistent progressive strength training can meaningfully reverse sarcopenia classification in older adults. The body responds. It is not too late. And I want to be clear for everyone listening. David's result is genuinely significant, but individual outcomes vary. What the research consistently shows is that the direction of change, with the right program and the right starting point, is positive. Not everyone will reach the same endpoint in 12 weeks. What matters is starting and being guided by someone who can assess where you actually are. 3 practical takeaways I want you to leave with today. First, if you are over 50 and you are not doing progressive resistance training at least twice a week, start. Not running, not walking, resistance, squats, push-ups, bends, weights, whatever you have access to. This is the evidence-based intervention for protecting your fast-twitch fibers. Second, consider adding a mind-body practice. Qigong, Tai Chi, even slow, deliberate yoga. The research is clear that these practices reduce inflammatory markers, improve balance and neuromuscular control, and address dimensions of muscle aging that resistance training alone does not fully cover. Third, get assessed. If you have had a fall, if you are slower on stairs, if you are noticing it is harder to get up, that is not just aging, that is a signal. See a physiotherapist. A functional assessment can identify the key risk markers, grip strength, gait speed, and muscle screening, and give you a starting point. For a full clinical diagnosis, your GP may refer you for further workup, but the most important step is not waiting. Act on the signals early, and the research is very clear that the body has the capacity to respond. David, I want to thank you for sharing your story so openly today. I think it will give a lot of people permission to start.
If one person hears this and goes and gets their grip strength tested, then it was worth it. I just wish someone had told me 10 years earlier.
That is why we are here. That is the wellness bridge. Ancient traditions and modern science are not rivals. They are two explorers who started from opposite ends of the same truth. And the bridge between them is you taking the first step. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave us a review. It helps more people find their way to this conversation. And remember, together we find balance in one.